Sometimes the popularity of a public figure transcends simple success and becomes a veritable myth, a phenomenon accentuated in recent times by both the relentless media frenzy and the crisis of values, but which nevertheless goes beyond this reductive vision. Ordinary people tend to identify with the mythologized star, experiencing their emotions and struggles firsthand, as recently happened with the unfortunate Princess of Wales, or simply re-evaluating and exaggerating the public figure, making them a role model to follow and imitate, especially in appearance but also in gestures, as was the case with James Dean, for example. But what characteristics must a figure possess to rise from the simple position of star to the more ethereal and unbreakable status of myth? Undoubtedly, at least three fundamental factors: charisma, transgression, and originality. An untimely passing, preferably at the peak of one's career, will forever immortalize one in the collective imagination, erasing one's flaws and highlighting only one's virtues, even if they are few. Be careful. Passing doesn't necessarily mean premature death, but rather a retreat from the scene, renouncing one's role as a public figure, but without completely abandoning one's fans, who at regular intervals will still receive news of their idol. This is the case, for example, of Mina, or more extreme, of Greta Garbo. Added to all this, of course, is the constant barrage of media, especially television, which constantly reminds us of old myths or creates new ones, regularly informing us of their movements. But what are the astrological signs of a myth? First of all, a strong Neptune. This planet, in fact, is connected both to the media, especially film and television, and to the neuroses that often afflict these characters and yet also make them so captivating. Neptune is joined by a strong Pluto, especially in aspect to the Sun, which provides the charisma without which it's almost impossible to make a lasting impression on others. Not to mention that their disappearance is usually Plutonian too, whether violently or simply by choosing to retreat into private life. The constant throughout all these characters is the aura of mystery that surrounds them and encourages the spread of the wildest theories, such as the alleged fake death of Elvis Presley, who, some would argue, was actually enjoying the Caribbean sun, or the intervention of the secret services in a veritable international intrigue surrounding the death of Princess Diana. Added to all this is a hint of Aquarian or Uranian values, underscoring a tendency toward transgression and originality. The astrological correspondences, however, don't stop at these superficial considerations, but on the contrary, become even more specific when analyzing the artistic field of the characters in question. Take, for example, music. First of all, the correspondences between the then known 7 planets and the 7 musical notes have been known since ancient times. Therefore, the aspects that link 2 planets to each other inevitably give rise to the union of 2 musical notes in such a way that, in practice, one could write a personalized astrological song using all the components of one's own chart. If we then consider that the 12 zodiac signs in turn are also connected to very specific notes, it will be easier to understand why one's vocal timbre always focuses on a very specific note called tonality and not on another. A very banal example: the song that made Lucio Battisti famous to the general public is undoubtedly La Canzone del Sole. And it is well known that this song, the first one learned in guitar lessons, focuses on the A chord progression, a note that coincidentally is precisely the one associated with the sign of Pisces, as Battisti is. But it's especially interesting to note how the 3 slow-moving planets are associated with 3 very specific musical genres that, in effect, determine the style and genre of the singer in question. Uranus is associated with rhythm, such as beat, swing, and syncopated rhythm in general. However, it primarily indicates interpretive ability rather than the creativity of one's vocal production. Neptune is associated with melodic music. It also indicates creativity. Pluto, due to its connection with the underworld, could only be associated with rock, hard rock, and heavy metal, that type of music known as devil's music. Let's now look at some examples of musical myths. Elvis Presley. He is undoubtedly one of the most enduring legends of our time. His style was characterized by a great versatility that saw him as both a standard bearer of rock and roll and of the melodic genre. But undoubtedly, it is the former that has defined him most, giving rise, even in Italy, to many of his counterparts, from Little Tony to Bobby Solo, who copied his style and hairstyle, to Adriano Celentano, who conversely copied his moves, especially in the early days of his career, earning him the nickname Moleggiato, just as Elvis was called the pelvis, an anatomical part associated coincidentally with Scorpio. And in this chart, Pluto, lord of the sign, is located in the eighth sign, co-signifying Scorpio, for his now ultra-famous move. First of all, the predisposition for singing is clearly indicated by the stellium, which includes the Sun and Venus, as well as Mercury in the second house, which is connected precisely with this artistic activity. But above all, Pluto, rock, stands out, opposite the Sun and in the eighth house and in a sextile aspect to the midheaven, professional success, and Neptune also in a trine aspect to the Sun, as well as placed in the ninth house, co-significant of Sagittarius, of which, together with Jupiter, it is the ruler. Regulator of the moon, which is placed in Pisces, its domicile, and in a square aspect to the ascendant, and placed precisely in Sagittarius. It is precisely this very strong position of the extremely stimulated planet Neptune that launched Presley's name into the firmament, erasing the last years when, ill and prey to psychotropic drugs, Neptune again, he was now unrecognizable, to crystallize the public's attention on that wonderful, extremely ductile voice, which could be tender and sweet as in Love Me Tender, or suddenly scratchy as in Jailhouse Rock, oscillating like him between his Pluto side and his Neptune side. Lucio Battisti. Here's a local legend, retired from the scene by his own choice and brought back to the attention of the public, always hungry for information, albeit scant, about him by a popular television show that sparked a veritable manhunt. While it undoubtedly created some disruption in the singer-songwriter's once quiet life, it certainly had the merit of reviving his popularity, somewhat tarnished by his latest album flops and the overwhelming success of his Audio 2 clones. His songs are now immortal, and it's striking that Lucio Battisti was born the day after another great Lucio, Lucio Dalla. In addition to the name and the zodiac sign of Pisces, he also shares a remarkable vocal versatility, so much so that, especially early in his career, Battisti's vocalizations in various keys became famous. These vocalizations also characterize Dalla, and Dalla has now perfected them to the point of competing with tenors of the caliber of Pavarotti. But let's get back to our man, Pisces, with a highly stimulated Neptune, even opposed to the MC, in addition to once again characterizing the extremely popular impact of his character, makes his genre predominantly melodic, even if that Pluto in first has given a slight nod to much more rock-oriented songs, such as 10 HP. It is precisely this Pluto, opposed to Mars in seventh the others, which combined with the Cancer ascendant has forced the subject to exit the scene due to a sort of idiosyncrasy towards his own audience. His live concerts have always been very few, at least as much as his television appearances. John Lennon. It's fair to say that Lennon was a double legend, First with the other members of the Beatles, then alone until his tragic death in New York, a highly energized Uranus, even one of the vertices of the grand Earth trine that also involves the moon, amply explains the early days of his career when, with the Beatles, he became a standard bearer of the Beat generation with songs like Love Me Do and Paperback Writer. For its part, Neptune, equally energized being in the 12th house, the counterpart of the 12th sign that Neptune rules, is the other pole of the same grand trine just mentioned, and equally well explains the second, more mystical and melodic period of his career, with songs like Imagine and Sky. That Uranus in the 8th house exhaustively explains the sudden and violent death, just as the opposition Saturn-Jupiter to Mercury, ruler of the 9th house, the outside, indicates well the place where it occurred.